Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jeff Steck from Tylerica Marketing Systems in Austin, Texas. And joining me are Ian Kentel from Outsourced Marketing in Toronto, Canada, and Ken Tucker and Paul Barthel from Changescape Web in St. Charles, Missouri. So today we're going to be talking about branding. We're going to dig into what it truly means to create a brand that connects emotionally, builds trust, and stands out in a crowded marketplace. So whether you're a small business owner, a marketer, or just curious about how the world's most iconic brands got it right, this episode is for you. We'll maybe get into a little bit about how they got it wrong. From defining your why to crafting unforgettable stories and avoiding common pitfalls, we're going to break it down and give you some actionable insights to some real world examples. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's talk about how you can build a brand that lasts. So let's go. Paul, let's start with you today. What is branding and why does it matter?
That's a really good question, because there is a difference between branding and marketing. And there's a difference between marketing and advertising too, as far as that goes. But, branding is about building trust and being recognizable. Jeff, something you mentioned is Walter Landor, who is the founder, I believe, of Landor and Fitch. He was a brand designer, and he said products are made in the factory, but brands are created in the mind. And if you see you can look at a State Farm logo and take out the State Farm, and you know what it is, okay, because they've built that brand. So, logos have to do with branding, but branding is a lot more than that. And brands, they build trust and they establish a connection with people. And I think, Jeff, you had mentioned Farmers Insurance, that they use these education focused campaigns, and they have a slogan. They have slogans that they use. All brands, they have a slogan that they use, and it's like Farmers Insurance. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, and they use that so often that they embed it in your mind, and it goes back to what Walter Landor said, that it's you hear that and you know exactly who it is, and a lot of different brands do this, and I think that's that's the big difference between branding and marketing, or branding and advertising. Branding is a part of marketing, and marketing is a part of branding, but branding it's building that trust, building those connections, and building that idea in people's minds that you have a slogan, or you have a logo that, even like I said, even without the name of your business, people look at that logo and they know who you are, what you do, what you stand for, and that's branding.
Mm-hmm. Kind of sets an expectation, huh?
It does.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to comment on, because I've had lots of I came out of graphic design originally, and so studied branding, studied how to develop brands, that kind of stuff. And there's always this weird debate that goes on that branding is different from marketing and marketing is different from branding. And it's not. It's actually that's like saying my skin is not part of my body.
They're interrelated. Absolutely.
Branding is part of marketing. It's marketing is your overarching topic or specialization, or whatever you want to call it, and branding is a portion of that. You can't have branding if it exists outside marketing as much as you can have skin existing outside of your body. It doesn't work. It's just part of the same whole.
Unless you're a
so
snake.
I always like to clarify that. What's that?
Unless you're a snake.
And come on, Ken. There's always exceptions to a rule, but in general,
he's calling you names.
I know. Whatever.
No, you're right, Ian. I mean, I think a lot of people they get hung up on these terms, and really it's a subset and a specific focus of your marketing, but it's not separate.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, branding agencies would love you to think it's an entirely different world, but it's not. Like, everything, when you develop a marketing plan, branding is part of your marketing plan. When you develop a branding plan, it should fit into a marketing plan. It doesn't exist on its own.
Mm-hmm. I think as we dig through some of the other questions, what's that, Paul?
Nothing exists in a silo.
I was going to say, I think when we dig into the rest of the questions we've prepared, we're going to see how it all fits together and how much commonality there is. The marketing exists to drive the brand out into the marketplace and to drive leads and prospects back to the business. But the branding is so central to do that. Without branding, you're just a business doing a function or selling a thing, and it's like yawn. When you think about the truly great companies, they've got really strong brands.
Marketing may generate leads and sales and things like that, but branding is that trust that a company has with the consumer. So you can do all the marketing you want, but that trust has to be built.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what branding does.
It's one of the first places that you start to set expectations too about who you are and how you're going to operate and what people can expect when doing business with you. Are you a stodgy old company, or are you a fun, edgy company? That's part of the brand, and that sets an expectation that people will either gravitate toward or run away from. So yeah. So it's probably a good transition to talk about how you start to develop a brand. So Ian, do you want to take that one on? Where do you start when developing a brand?
Sure. Yeah. And just to clarify, like, if you're a small business, don't go crazy. Like, some of this stuff will be like your business 2.0 to some degree, because your brand can start with your brand promise. This is who we are. This is what we promise to do. Deliver on what you promise. You start to develop a reputation, right? And that becomes part of your brand promise. But if you start to think in a bigger picture, like, we want to develop a brand, we're an existing business, or we're a startup business and we have capital behind us, then yeah, like, you should start to focus on this in a very specific way. And one of the best ways to start is starting with your why. Why does your business exist? And you can't actually answer that question without asking the question of who is our ideal customers. And I know we're going to dig into this more later, but you actually can't have a why without an ideal customer. If you do create a why without an ideal customer, an actual customer that needs your product or service, you're just creating, like, air, right? Like, you're actually going down a path where you may create, in fact, the world is littered with brands that thought they were creating something really spectacular. There was no desire for the product or service. They hadn't actually determined who the right people were, and that they would actually pay for the product or service. So I think they're intertwined together. You have to know that. And your why should be about, the why, your mission, your core values, they're all part and parcel of why you exist as a business. So your why taps into customers' emotions and it inspires loyalty. But again, be very careful about this. Like, don't, I've seen some businesses where they kill themselves trying to create this why without actually just delivering their service. So what I'm thinking, guys, and you feel free to disagree, but like, if you're a plumber, if you're a dentist, even, or you need to serve people in order to understand what your why is. Sometimes you actually have to take the first step in delivering service to unpack who your ideal clients are, and specifically, if you're niching down, developing what is a specific need, pain point that we're going to meet, and then that can lead very quickly into what your why is, what your mission is, what your vision for the future is, because these are all very powerful concepts. Because if you have a very clear mission and you can tell people about it, if your team knows what your mission is, you will be unified in the direction that you're going down, right? You'll be able to clearly communicate it to your clientele, but you'll also have a clear mission. And then your vision is for the future. People need a vision. They need to know that you're on the path for not just serving them well today, but for the future. And then core values are really principles that guide how you operate. And people are attracted to these. A really good example is Patagonia, right? A lot of people know that brand. It's kind of the, adventurers brand, right? But not just an adventurers brand. There's lots of other adventure type apparel brands. But Patagonia has been very focused on saving the earth, on being responsible with materials, on leaving no trash behind, right? And they've done that from almost day one because of the why, the passion, the heart of the person that founded it. And they've been very good about creating this message of environmental stewardship, connect co-conscious customers. And so that's an example of that. But even in smaller businesses where we've worked with them, things like, and this ties in very closely with the concept of creating a core difference, a core message, because your brand has to actually, in order for you to communicate it out, you have to have a brand message. And that brand message has to differentiate you from the competition. And then that leads into that concept that we referred to earlier, which is a brand promise. When you deliver your brand message, you're actually promising something to customers. So we have a home remodeling business that we worked with on a core message, and it was the essence of the core message was that they have redefined the home remodeling experience, and they really have. In fact, they had been doing this for years. We were just able to articulate it for them out to the world. But what that does is it positions them very differently from their competition. And then I would also add that your logo is the face of your business, and it's tied very specifically to your brand message, who you are, what you want to communicate. It's the visual representation and, quite frankly, a memory hook of your business. And again, we've all seen it where businesses have spent far too much money, far too much time, energy, effort into branding or rebranding. And that's both logo, brand, message. Sometimes they stare. I don't know. I heard this term once and it's always stuck with me, but belly button staring, right? You should be looking out into the world. You should be examining your audience, but instead you're staring at your own business too often sometimes. And so when I worked in the corporate world, I was involved in some rebranding exercises where I'm like, what the heck are they doing? Like, why has the leadership decided to take this very well-known brand, and we've seen it in broader circumstances too, like Coke, what was it?
New Coke.
New Coke.
Yeah. Or the Tropicana bottles, or right, like they're staring too much at their own world, because quite frankly, when you work corporately, when you look at your brand as a business, you guys are seeing it everywhere you look. Like if you're in a corporation, it's on every wall, it's on every piece of stationery, it's on your computer screen, it's when you walk in the door, and you're the only ones getting tired of it for the most part. The community at large doesn't need you to rebrand a lot of times. So that's not to say you might not need to. It's just, you really need to determine if it's worthwhile or not before you go down that path, because it's very expensive once you've developed a brand.
Yeah, Ian, I think you made a fantastic point when you were talking about you have to serve sometimes to really understand your why. And so a lot of newer businesses that are starting out, I mean, they don't really have that why defined. I mean, you literally you're in existential mode. You've got to take the business that you can get, and build up your book of business, and then start to turn that into profit. And as you evolve and as you execute, you're going to find these events that change your direction. A couple of examples that I think of is when I ran for political office several years ago. I'll never forget this, and I every single day from that point forward in my campaign. When I knocked on somebody's door, they told me that they were so happy that somebody stopped by, that and that their significant other had been unemployed for several months, and they were really struggling, and they didn't feel like anybody cared, and they gave me a $5 donation because that's all that they could do. And I mean, that just floored me. I mean, it's like this is exactly why I was knocking on doors, because if you know me, that's not something that I'm inclined to do. And so I remembered that every day, and I still get goosebumps about that. And hopefully it changed me for the better, not only in, running a campaign, which I was unsuccessful, but, just in the way I try to conduct my life. Another example is a financial advisor friend of mine. He's had some personal situations with a healthcare related issue that affected his family. And because of that, he has changed his focus and his why to serve people who are struggling with similar situations. And I don't want to reveal the healthcare, issue or anything like that this person, and their family was dealing with, out of their respect. But it's through the execution, sometimes through your own personal experiences, and sometimes it's what you see, with the communities that you're trying to serve.
One of the really neat things, I love it when it happens. It doesn't always happen, but I'll be talking with another business owner, especially in like environments like BNI, where you do a lot of one-to-ones and you learn each other's businesses. I've had the experience where, or even when I'm interviewing clients to develop, their marketing plan, there's sometimes when that person's eyes light up, they start to get excited, their passion in what they do, and usually it's because of a question about, like, why did you get into this, or why do you love what you do? And if you can bottle that up and share that with the public, that can be such a powerful brand for people, right? Like, because you're sharing the bigger picture, the passion, and people care about that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
For sure.
Yeah,
I mean, it gets
I
hard
wanna
for the bigger organization, but
I want to amplify that, because when you started talking about why, I was thinking through the exact same thing, that you need to be able to answer that question of why you started your business, and maybe not immediately, like Ken said, you're in existential mode, but pretty quickly, if you're going to develop a substantial brand, it's going to be the basis of it. People are going to ask you, and being able to tell your story. I know Ken's going to talk about that in a minute, but being able to tell your story becomes very important, and you can't do a great job at that if you don't have a good answer to the why. So you need to anticipate people asking the question, why did you start this business? And I'll tell you, if it's about, well, I wanted to make a lot of money, that's probably not the right answer. And you're probably not being truthful to yourself, because, if you take most business owners, especially early on, if they take the extra amount of time and effort they're putting into building a business, it dilutes their hourly rate to where they might as well stayed working as a plumber, working for the plumbing company they were there. But there's a reason they broke out of that. There's a reason they decided to go out on their own. And it probably wasn't all about the money. It was probably because they thought they could do it better. They thought they could serve their clients better, taking it back to, understanding how you're going to serve your clients and getting some of that experience and searching for it. I think being able to answer the, why did you start this business, and why are you different from everybody else? Why is this important to you? Those are all great questions. And I go back to Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And if you don't want to read the book, there's an 18-minute TED Talk. I rewatch it at least once a quarter. It is just really phenomenal. And there's a quote, from Simon. It's people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And you talked about vision, Ian. When you can match your vision of where you're going and what the world looks like with what other people are looking for, that is so powerful. Back in my high tech days, we talked a lot about transactional leading to relationship leading to bigger transactions. We talked about big T and little T and big R and little R. And, if I led with that, somebody would have made a joke. But, the point is you want to get to a relationship basis, and you need to have a vision match, and you need to have alignment on the why and what you stand for, which is your brand, right? So, I think this is a great topic to dig into. Paul,
if I can
Ian, anything else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. Like, I talked about like being cautious about rebranding, but I'm thinking like once you've developed a brand, one of the things I would encourage people to do, especially if you're just starting a brand, it's a startup business, or you're just going down this path to properly brand your business, is don't be scared to do rapid prototyping. And what I mean by that is, like, put it out in, like, once you spend due diligence, like, don't just throw anything out, but take the time to do it right. But then don't be scared to get it out into the market and leverage it, because that will be your biggest feedback mechanism. One of the worst things, like, I hate seeing this, but I see it all the time. People will create a brand message, or they'll create a logo, and they'll throw it up to a Facebook group, and they'll be like, "Hey, what do you think of my logo?" And I'm like, what does that tell you? Like, are these people even your they're your peers? Like it's, that stuff drives me crazy, because it's actually not representative of the people you're going to be serving. So, like, get it out into the marketplace, get it working for you, learn from it, adapt and optimize it as quickly as you possibly can, and refine it into a brand, because people will give you feedback quick, right? Once you put it out in the marketplace, and you'll know if it resonates with people or not. So yeah.
We're gonna talk about brand consistency in a little while too. I mean, it is important to recognize that things evolve and change over time, especially logos, aesthetics, look and feel. But the core values probably don't or shouldn't. The root messaging, the why elements really. If 1 week you're all about saving the planet, and the next week you're all about maximizing use of resources, well, it's like, well, wait a minute, aren't these contradicting? And which was it? You're one thing last week, you're something else this week. That's needs to be thought out in advance. But other elements of it, like you said, just expect that it will evolve and change or be refined over time.
Well, I would even say, like, in the early stages, you may have to adapt. Like say you decided to be an environmentally friendly soap product back in the 60s. Nobody would have bought it if it was more expensive, right? Sometimes, and what was the car that was like leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else? The Enzo or whatever. Edsel. Like, that story is a classic of somebody creating a fantastic product. They branded it, they got it out in the market, and right, like, they had a fantastic why. It was to create the best car possible with the best technology at the time. But so all I'm saying is, especially for small businesses, this is much harder in big businesses, but small businesses, be ready to adapt if there's no resonance of your brand message early on, right? Like, that could be a sign that, crap, like, we picked something that people aren't picking up. We might be ahead of our time. Maybe that will be our brand message in 3 years.
Anyone else want to add anything before we jump to the next question?
No.
All right, Ken, I'm gonna save you, because I'm gonna have Paul jump in next. I want you to hit the big question in a minute, but
Okay.
Paul, can you talk a little bit about how understanding your customers and crafting a unique value proposition factors into branding? I think we're just hitting on that a little bit, but can you expand on that a little more?
Yeah, and I think, Ian said something about, who was it, Patagonia, whatever it was. Never heard of him. Anyway,
you're gonna see people wearing their jackets all over the place now, especially as it's coming into the colder weather.
And then you said something about your one thing this week and one thing next week, and I think branding. I think small business need to understand branding is different. If you're a small local business, branding is different than if you're a national or international corporation. There's some differences, and if you're a small business, you need to understand your ideal customer. We talked about this in the past, and why are they doing business with you? What are their needs and pain points, and what are they looking for? And there's something called SWOT: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and what are your opportunities in your marketplace? Because if you're a local business in Boise, Idaho, it doesn't matter what the opportunities are in New York. You're not doing business there. And what threats are presented to you by your competitors in your marketplace? What is your unique value proposition to your potential clients, to your prospects? And you have to know these things, because going back to what Ian said, I don't know, I guess it's still a thing, but for a while there, you had the eco investors that they wouldn't buy stocks in oil companies because they were destroying the environment, which, okay, fine. But to me, investing is about making money, not making a political statement. It's like the saying that the military is not the place for sociological experimentation. But you have to understand your customers. And if you live in an area where, for instance, environmental consciousness, so to speak, is important, then you need to be aware of that, because if you live in an area where that's extremely important, you can't ignore that. So what do you offer? What's unique about what you offer, and what's important to your ideal clients? And then you have to work that into your brand messaging. And I think that's kind of what I have on that.
Yeah, I think that gets into how you talk about your business. I was going to say craft your story. Ken's going to go deep on that in a minute, but yeah,
that's why I kept it short.
It's the fundamentals of you've got to know your target audience and what resonates with them and why you're doing something different. You can't really craft your brand messaging, your brand positioning, your brand story, and even your logo needs to resonate. If you're using that example again of the environmentally conscious company, you wouldn't put a big, oil derrick dripping oil everywhere, right? So yeah, how you define things starts with that research, that understanding your customers that you're going after, recognizing that you aren't the brand for everyone. Some businesses, I pick on realtors all the time, but because they're an easy example. But how many realtors have you ever met when you ask them, what kind of people they work with, and they kind of, I think they think they're being funny, but they say, oh, anyone who lives in a house or wants to live in a house. Well, that's not very refined. They're going to have a hard time branding themselves. We're the realtor for everyone. Well, are you really? I'm not everyone. So understanding what you're doing, who you're going after, what matters to them, and then using that market research, looking at how your competitors are positioning, that all factors into it. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, as you look at brands, kind of the flip side is you're thinking about your own, looking at others, looking at how they're positioning. I'll hold it for later, but I'm going to use the example, if we don't already hit on it, of 3 car companies and how they position very differently. They're all making cars, but they all position very differently because they're going after a different audience. So yeah, should we move into storytelling? Because I think that's the fun part of branding.
Before we do, Jeff,
yeah,
I think we all believe this and agree to this, but like having a unique value proposition or core difference is so important for the business, because what happens is, when we do competitive analysis of clients and their competitors in the area, this is one of the cool audit things I think we all do when we're doing strategy, is we look at all of the websites of the client, our client,
mm-hmm.
their business, and their competitors. And and you very clearly start to understand that most small businesses do not have a core difference. Like for an electrician, all the competitive electricians are like, electrician in this area, like amazing, great customer service, or right, like it's there. And the reason why it's so important to have this core difference, this point of differentiation, a unique selling proposition, is because otherwise you leave people in a vacuum. They don't know what's different about you. They don't know electrical work, right? They're just looking at your websites, your brand, your message. They will always default to price. And as business owners, default to price. We know it's part of the equation, and that's okay. We need to face that fact. People need to spend money to work with us, whatever the business is, for clean teeth, for electrical work. But if you don't differentiate yourself, that's a huge problem. And that's part of the branding process, right? You got to have that. Yeah.
So there's a quote from Warren Buffett that I love that says, price is what you pay, value is what you get. So let's paraphrase that a little bit to put a marketing spin on it. Price is what you pay. Our unique value proposition is what you get.
Right? Nice.
That's
Can we quote you? Key. That's a good one.
Only if we get Warren Buffett's permission, I guess. I don't know. Ken, let's jump to you then. You have been deep into using story as part of marketing for a while. I know you're deep into story brand. I think you are, or at one point were story brand certified. We all love it, but I wanted to go to you on this one. Feel free to expand with story brand concepts if you wish. Maybe hit on some of the brand archetypes, so we can talk to those in a bit later too if we need to. But tell us about writing and living your brand story, or a brand story.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I think the big mistake that most businesses make is they only focus on their story and their brand story. And really, it's got to be about your customer. And so when you look at the classic structure of story, the hero is somebody who has a problem. And so, that doesn't really translate to how you're going to be talking about your business initially. You want to really focus your homepage and any of your key landing page where you're driving people to be about the problem that you solve for your customer, who is the hero. The hero has a problem. Now, what I love about StoryBrand is, they focus on 3 layers of problems. And most people just kind of gloss over this, but it's actually massive. There's an external problem. I always use a dentist because I think a lot of people can think about that. Ian, I know you spend a lot of time working with dentists, but it's like, my external problem is I've got a toothache. My internal problem is, and by the way, that's how most people start their search, is I've got a toothache, I need to go find a dentist. The reason who they select to buy from usually is based on their internal problem, which they may or may not express explicitly in a search. And the internal problem would be like, gosh, I get so anxious every time I go to the dentist, or it hurts every time I go to the dentist. So, so I don't like it. I'm afraid, and so if a dentist talks about how they solve that internal problem, they're probably going to convert pretty highly with that particular searcher looking for that solution. And then, the philosophical is, it's 2024, almost 2025, pain-free dentistry or stress-free dentistry, should just be the norm these days. So that 3 layers of problem, I think, is massive because it has implications on search, implications on messaging and differentiation, and too many people don't take advantage of that. If they can't, Donald Miller, who created StoryBrand, and I know also John Jansch has talked about this a lot as well from Duct Tape Marketing. When you land on somebody's website, Donald Miller says, if you can't grunt back the message in a matter of a couple of seconds, that message isn't, that website is not communicating clearly what that message is. And what John Jansch did from Duct Tape Marketing is like, okay, look at 3 different websites, of you and your competitors in a local market without any indication of what, whose business is what, so don't show your logo, don't show the header images or anything like that. Just look at the initial message that you're putting out there. How is that different? Is it different from what your competitors are saying? And if not, how are you memorable? Why would people choose to work with you? So, I love where the rubber meets the road in differentiation and laying it out to make it really obvious and clear for people who visit your website to understand exactly what it is that you do and how you help them solve the problem that they have. So, the classic elements of story from the story brand script perspective are the hero is your customer. They have a problem. It has 3 different levels. They're looking for a guide. That's your business. That's where you come into play with a solution that calls them to action to achieve success and or avoid failure. So that's the basic story arc that we've used to communicate for millennia. And so if you're not tapping into that and you just have really generic language and all you do is just kind of regurgitate, stuff that you do, but not why you do it or the value that you provide and how you help solve people's problems, even acknowledging the problems that they're having and the struggles that they're dealing with, you're probably going to be very unforgettable, and you're going to miss out on the grunt test because somebody's going to look 3 seconds, they're going to move on. There are a lot of search results that are going to pop up. So unless your business is just incredibly unique when they find you in that initial search, if you don't communicate clearly on the homepage of your website, or if you're driving people to a specific landing page about a specific service, they're going to move on. Now, what I think is also really important is to have the elements of story about the business and to really talk about the brand story. That really does get into the why, the challenges, the causes that you support, all of the things that we've talked about so far. I think that's historically and classically what people do from a branding perspective, but you miss a lot of conversions if you don't also create content specifically because if you don't get people to opt in and want to understand more about your business, develop that curiosity, they're going to move on to somebody else. And so StoryBrand is a great way to get that initial hook in. And then, with StoryBrand, we've had Dr. JJ Peterson, on our podcast in the past. And, they've also written a book called Marketing Made Simple, where it really starts to talk about the sales funnel. And a part of the key element of a sales funnel is not only the landing page, but also the email nurture series. And so what goes into that? And here's where you can start to kind of differentiate yourself and get into telling your brand's story a little bit more. You can provide testimonials from customers. You can talk about, paradigm shift of why you're different, how you deliver your products or services differently, how they stand out in the market compared to competitors, adding case studies, overcoming objections, realizing that people have problems. They're scared to do business. Like they may not want to go to a dentist if the dentist doesn't say I handle pain-free dentistry. So if a dentist has content in an email that says, thanks for contacting us. By the way, did you know that we specialize in pain-free dentistry, and here's what we do, and here's the environment. We create a spa-like environment, yada, yada, yada. I don't know, Ian, you probably know that better than I do. But it's really essential to get into all of that stuff. And too many businesses just, what they do is they throw up a bullet point list of services. Here's what I do, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, sometimes it's obvious what that means. Sometimes it isn't, because when you're in a business, you get kind of trapped into this inside language, or which technical language that we all use within our own businesses that oftentimes is just gobbledygook, from somebody from the outside looking in. And, a phrase that you use each and every day may not mean anything to somebody who has a problem. A simple example is, somebody's looking for a retirement plan, and all you talk about are 401ks or, 501. No, what was it? Anyway, 403Bs or whatever they are. I don't even know. But if that's all you talk about, people are like, well, I don't know if that's me or not. You're going to confuse. And if you confuse, as Donald Miller says, you lose. So you need to make it simple. The other thing I love about Donald Miller and what he talks about with clarity of message is, the human brain is the size, or the human head is the size of a bowling ball, and roughly the same weight. So if you're putting out a lot of content on your website and you're making people have to think too hard, they're consuming energy and calories, and you're basically making them try to juggle with bowling balls, basically. You don't want to do that. You want to make it as crystal clear and as obvious, and guide people through that story to say, okay, here's my problem. All right, these people get it. Oh, look, here's what they do. Here's their credentials about why I should trust them, why I should work with them. Here's how I get started. Okay. And here's what I can expect if I work with these guys, and here's some of the stuff that maybe I can avoid that maybe I hadn't thought about. If you structure your content that way, it's very powerful. And then you reinforce it with the classic brand story that way too many people only talk about as it relates to the business. Why do you do what you do? What's your passion? How do you give back to the community? All of these that demonstrate your core values and the corporate culture that you've fostered and developed. That's in my mind, that's really the winning combination. And I think the story brand, intentionally different than brand story, is the essential element that way too many businesses have missed historically. And that's why story brand has become so popular, because it fills that gap and lets people, really kind of shift the tables, or turn the tables, if you will, and focus on customer instead of on the business. So that's,
You talked.
yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the brand story versus the story brand kind of stuff. I mean, in terms of archetypes, I mean, and this is probably something that I think is going to be more relevant for larger businesses as they kind of build up, a bigger set of customers and kind of need to stand out. You've got hero like Nike, with Just Do It, or you've got Subaru, who's really kind of an explorer. Patagonia, is kind of an explorer model, or archetype, I should say, where, they're really communicating through their messaging to really reach people who care about outdoors, exploration, responsible stewardship of our planet, things like that. Ford, focuses on like everyman, where, it's like our trucks are built, rugged and tough and, and suitable for every person out there. You've got high level archetypes that are out there. And if you're spending a lot of money on advertising, that becomes super important. Especially, the reality is, branding is built through constant bombardment of messaging and clarity of message. So the more that you're out there in the world, the more memorable you can make your brand, or not, if you're not doing a good job with it.
Yeah, I wanted to specifically dig into the archetypes a little bit. That's why I added it to the show prep, because I think it's important for tying back to that emotional connection that you're making with your target audience, and also really understanding your target audience. Going back to my example of the realtor, they would have very different messaging, very different way they talk to people, tell their story, if they're focusing on first-time home buyers versus elderly downsizers, right? So the archetypes come into what's going to resonate most with the ideal client. You have to know the ideal client and understand that. Yeah. So I think it's a good exercise to go through. And then I mentioned earlier I was going to hit on 3 different car manufacturers. You hit on at least one of them. Ford is the everyman. Subaru, right, tends to be the Explorer. Think of their TV commercials. You're seeing them driving Subaru Outbacks up mountains, right? And then think of Lexus, luxury, quality. Can you imagine how well those campaigns would work if Subaru was trying to appeal to the Explorer adventurous type and they were talking about luxury and quality? Or if Ford was trying to position their trucks as Ford are tough, but we're going after, a different archetype that just didn't resonate. It's important to, as you go through that ideal client exercise, and think about how to build your story, how to build your messaging, to factor that in and kind of pick your lane, almost, so to speak, using the car example. I think the archetypes are a great thing to think through. And I think if you do a little digging on them online, there's like 10 or 12 primary ones. And it's just another, I'm not saying follow an exact pattern and, this is exactly how I should write it, but think through it and use it to inform and guide how you're going to position, how you're going to message.
Yeah. And I'll just go back to the elements of value pyramid. I mean, if you're serious about doing this work, go pay for that. It's a couple bucks, but it's something that you have to buy through the Harvard Business Review, but it's a really handy tool to use to reference, about, because, and it's based, it's a similar model to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got, safety, security, self-actualization ultimately at the top. What do you sell? What problem do you solve for a client? Where does that fit into, just existing, something I need to exist, something I need to alleviate pain, or something that, makes me feel good and have, really, make people jealous because I can afford to drive this kind of a vehicle, or I can have this kind of siding on my home, the aspirational stuff. Mm-hmm. What is it that you sell? What problems do you solve? And how do you make people feel about that? Those are all important elements that you have to factor in to this whole process of defining your core message and building out your brand. And then you've got to obviously have the graphics to reinforce that, the colors and your logos and being consistent, in the way that those things look. I think, when we were talking about logos a little bit, sometimes you create a logo and then it gets a little dated over a period of time, right? So you don't change your entire branding necessarily, but you might need to change your logo because your logo is kind of a representation of your brand. And if it looks old and stale, like it was developed in 1908, and what you're solving for a customer doesn't really relate to 1908 or 2008 for that matter, then maybe you need to refresh your logo a little bit. Maybe you need to brighten up your colors or, make it more contemporary looking, but still honor it. Don't go down the route of, Coke or Pepsi. I mean, some of the big mistakes they made with like Pepsi Crystal or the new Coke, I mean, it just confused the hell out of people. And they're like, what? Why would I want to drink a clear Pepsi? Well, what's so special about that? I mean, supposedly the taste wasn't any different. It was just, it was a different color. So it's like, don't add confusion. You're working hard to establish consistency of message and permanence of message. Don't F that up.
Yeah, I think this notion of logo, just as a quick side note, this notion of logos evolving is a really interesting one. Google your favorite brand. Google IBM logo changing over time, Coke logo changing over time. AT&T, I worked at AT&T when they first came out with what we called the ball. The first AT&T company that used it was American Bell, and we called it American Ball. And that's evolved 4 times, and it looks very different now than it started, but it's still recognizable as the AT&T logo.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the messaging, the values, I think that's why it's important to go back to the mission, the vision, the values need to be supported by the brand. So I think, unless you want to jump in with anything, I think it's a good segue into the next question, but you've been quiet for a while. I don't want to ignore you. Have you got anything you want to add on a story topic?
Coke and Pepsi can afford to be stupid. Money.
Yeah, a couple of the bigger brands that you think would be smart.
Sponsorship. Thanks, Paul.
Some of the bigger brands you think would be smart have lost a lot of money on some of those missteps. But you're right, they can afford to and still be big.
And the one thing I would add to that discussion is that as you build a brand, you build equity in that brand. It's actually a valuable product that increases the value of your saleable, sell your business. And so, that's probably that biggest mistake with brands is that if a logo has equity in it with your audience, you need to be very careful that you don't diminish the equity, the quality, the value of that brand, right? So subtle changes are usually okay. Big changes, you're actually reducing the value of that brand.
Yeah, good point. I've seen cases where, small businesses get bought, and they get bought with the intention of this is going to be accretive. It's going to add to our overall business. And then they absorb the brand and they don't keep it. And guess what? It doesn't add as much as they thought it would, because people are looking for that brand and they can't find it anymore. That's why we actually bought a small web design firm several years back. We still keep that nameplate for that reason. We still have people call us from that nameplate. It's just another DBA in our business. Before I jump to the next one, there's a quote that I love. It's a Seth Godin quote talking about the subject of story. He said, "Marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but the stories you tell." It's capturing hearts and minds and bringing them in to do business with you. So Ian, we got about 10 minutes or so left. I got one more question after this one. So let's hit on brand consistency and how it builds trust and loyalty.
Yeah, super important. I think most people understand this intrinsically, that your brand needs to be consistent. It needs to be trustworthy. And the whole essence of your business is to reinforce every customer interaction with your brand, to reinforce the brand promise, the brand value, that you're keeping your promises. So, one of the analogies I like to use is, imagine there was a person close to you who acted radically different every time you saw them, right? That you do not feel safe with that person, and unless you're really adventurous and you're like, hey, I wonder what John's going to do today, But most of us want safety. We want security. We want to know that when we invest, when we exchange our hard-earned money for something, whether it's a service or a product, that we're going to get what is promised to us. And so I think that's, if I were to boil down the whole consistency of brand to build trust and loyalty, I think that's the essence of it. If you can keep your promises as a brand, then you're going to continue to get return business, and people are going to continue to value your brand. There's lots of examples where brands have created, whether it's a mission or a vision or a brand message or a logo, that they set it because this is what we're trying to achieve. This is who we're going to become. Except it has no reference to who they are today. Aspiration is good, but if you can't deliver on what you're aspirationally saying you can deliver on, that's a problem, right? So keep your promises, be consistent with your brand, and by that, reinforce you as a business, and you as your team will hear and see your brand every day, all day. Do not get bored of it. Do not get tired of saying the same thing. Reinforce it. That is how other people will come to trust it. If you deliver on what you promise, it's got to be not just to the outer world, the people you serve and the public at large. It's got to be to your own employees too, that you have to have brand consistency within your business, If part of your brand is about quality, delivering quality, then you better really care about your staff. You better show that you are a quality place to work as well, because that essence flows through your whole brand.
Yeah, I think that consistency is important for the trust, for the recognition, right? If you're always having a different message, always a different logo, always different colors, then it's like people just aren't going to recognize it. The messaging is going to be, again, building into that. They're constantly being reinforced about what they're going to get. I go back to McDonald's, the very early days of McDonald's. They weren't the best hamburger, and they still aren't the best hamburger. And there's a lot of other burger companies out there that have started up to be better with burgers, and they're doing well. But McDonald's grew so fast because it was consistency. You could go into McDonald's in Atlanta, you could go into a McDonald's in Bismarck, and you could get the same burger essentially. So that consistency in terms of how you present and the experience, taking branding back to the experience. A big part of branding is setting the tone and reinforcing the experience that you're going to deliver. The consistency is important there. And I think you mentioned don't get complacent internally too, right? Everyone in the company needs to understand the brand alignment, the brand positioning, and that everything they do supports it. I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I started with a slide, blank slide, and I asked people in the audience, what do you think branding is? And then I gathered up all the responses, and then I showed a slide that had, 12 or 14 different elements of branding, and they hit on most of them. It's not just that one thing. It's not the logo. It's not the message. It's everything that works together to position, tell the story of the business, and create that trust, loyalty, and consistency. Before we jump to our last question, Ken, Paul, you want to add anything to the consistency?
I don't think so.
All right. Then here's kind of a quick one. Let's, Ken, why don't you kick it off, and then we can all jump in as we think of things. What are some branding do's and don'ts?
Well, I'll focus on the do's. I'll let the other guys kind of talk about the don'ts if they want. So we've talked about define your mission and your core values clearly. As I've been thinking about it over the last couple of minutes, really, I think your homepage is designed for your customers to communicate to them as they are the heroes. Your about page is where you get an opportunity to talk about your brand story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and those, by the way, those happen to be the two most visited pages for most business websites. So, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, if you will. So consistency obviously plays a big role in that. Congruency between what you're saying, how you solve a problem for a customer versus what your brand story, and your, why you do what you do, those have got to resonate and be congruent with one another as well. And everything that you do should be demonstrated, and everything that you believe should be demonstrated through customer experience, and just reinforcing, as Ian calls it, the brand promise. And then, obviously things are going to change over time. I mentioned a couple of examples where either me or somebody that I know, and I know, Ian, I think you mentioned an example where as you execute, some things are going to change. You're going to tweak some things. You're going to modify some things. Embrace that. We're not in a static world, and whether that's the way your business is represented visually through a logo, or whether it's tweaking your core message based on what really gets you and your team excited about from a customer experience or a personal experience that you had. So definitely take advantage of those things. But clarity of message, consistency, making sure that, everybody in the company understands, what those are, the core mess, it's not just external facing, it's also got to be internal facing.
Mm-hmm. Any other do's, Ian, Paul? Things to make sure you hit?
No, those are good. And I think we've shared a bunch throughout as well.
Yeah.
So let's jump to don'ts, even if it's just a recap. Paul, any don'ts that you want to hit on?
I guess the biggest thing is don't we talked about in the past, your ideal client is not anyone with a bank account. Don't try to be everyone to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about the importance of when you have that, using that to guide, your messaging and everything else about how you position your brand. Ian?
Yeah, I would add have realistic expectations. So don't have unrealistic expectations, I guess, is the don't. Because some people think like, hey, if we create a new brand for ourselves, if we create a new logo, if we create a new brand message, suddenly sales are going to boom. That almost never happens. So branding is kind of a foundational element of, just like, I was talking about, skin is a part of your body, is branding is part of marketing, right? Marketing is the body. But you need to be clear on that, sales are not dependent on the brand necessarily or a rebrand. So you need to focus on and have really realistic expectations. And also when you rebrand or measuring branding, so measuring the success of your brand, like businesses can never do this well. It's almost impossible because you're trying to get inside people's heads of how they perceive you as a business. So some of the common ways are things like net promoter score, brand recall, surveys, focus groups. They all fall very short. They're all artificial. The very best way to determine if your brand is resonating with people is, are you growing your business after a rebrand or after you've branded? And keep asking people, especially small businesses. Like imagine if you were, you go in and do some plumbing for someone, ask them what their thoughts are. Why did you choose me? Like, why did you choose us as a plumber? And that's one of the best ways to get, true feedback. And that's where, as a business grows, it's harder and harder to get authentic feedback from people, especially as the owner gets further and further away from the sale.
Yeah, I've got a couple, and the feedback was one of them. And the classic example we had on earlier, when Coke brought out New Coke, they got in their own heads, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and people are going to love it. And guess what? They didn't. Fortunately, they recognized that pretty quickly. When their sales started going down, that was a big indicator. And then they brought out their old Coke as Coke Classic. Yeah, they were trying to compete.
Right. Yep. They did it because they were eroding sales from Pepsi sales. And so they reacted, but they did it wrong.
Reacted badly.
Yeah. So their sales went further down.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's on like kind of the real. Yeah, exactly. Oh, gee, me too. And I guess it's kind of the same vein. Realize that two things that are probably the same sides of the same coin is, don't get stuck in your own head thinking that what people are going to want, what the brand is. I think you mentioned that, it's not all about you. It's about serving the market. It's about positioning for what you have, meeting what people need, going back to the why, and then taking it forward through there. And you can't be stuck in your own head. You can't be like, oh, this is great, people are just going to want to buy it, and they don't even need to know anything about it. They're just going to love it when they see it. It's important stuff, and you got to make it a mix of what you've got, what you're doing, and what people are looking for. And you can't make it all about, you can't just say upfront, we know everything and how we're going to do it. You got to be adaptable, and you got to tailor it, I guess is where I'm trying to go to the audience, tailor it to the people. Anything anyone else wants to add? I think we're at time.
No, this was a good discussion, Jeff.
Yeah, I think we got a good place to wrap up then. So recap it. Branding is about creating emotional connections, maintaining consistency, and telling and living your brand story authentically, really connecting with people and drawing them in. So let me leave you with a final quote and a call to action. The quote is, branding demands commitment to continual reinvention. And that's Sir Richard Branson. And then the call to action is, reflect on your brand's why and how you live up to that in every interaction with your prospects, clients, people that you serve. So Ian, would you like to take us out?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for listening to us today and joining us today. As always, share it with the world. Don't hide this. It's wonderful stuff we're sharing. And if you have any ideas of things or pain points that you'd like us to cover, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to explore those topics and share them on here. So until next week, folks, keep calm and mark it on.